Hey, good afternoon, and welcome back to Talk Today. Thank you so much for joining us as we invite you to become involved in a forum and actively engage and participate in all of our programming, and especially to invite you to be a part of this next segment as we welcome to our studio, with great respect, to the MLA and Councillor Austin Harris. I'd say Ms. Sharon Ralston first, and then Mr. Harris. He would say to me like his mama, they might not raise handsome sons, but they raise polite ones. Right, sir?
You're absolutely correct. Ladies always go first in any circumstance, regardless of title or otherwise. So a very special good afternoon to you, Sterling. Pleasure to be with you, and delighted to be joined by the Director of Work, the Workforce Opportunity and Residency Cayman, Ms. Sharon Ralston.
Ms. Sharon, thank you so much, Mom, for joining us. I'm glad that you're in here, because now that adds, just color, character, but hopefully some, wonderful.
Hopefully something cerebral as well.
I'm going to guess Sharon is going to increase the seriousness level of our discussion, because when Mr. Sterling and I get together, we have a tendency to have a little too much fun.
I have a task ahead of me then.
Well, you know what? We know that you're up to it, because, as you said, the cerebral nature of it. And this is important. If I could, perhaps at the outset, allow our listeners to get a perspective, what is the workplace opportunities and residency Cayman work. It's not worky.
No. See what I mean?
Here we go.
See what I mean?
It's far more serious than that, I'm happy to say.
Yes.
I should start by saying that this was the vision of the Honourable Premier. It was his vision that we completely re-engineer the way we look at our employment, training, and our work permit and other permissions systems at immigration. And so what work is not, and this is very important, work is not a merger of two existing departments within the Cayman Islands government. It is not a merger of immigration and NWDA. It is an entirely brand new organization that we are building from the ground up. So it's quite a mammoth undertaking, and I can tell you when I saw my job description, I about turned it down, but it's a process, and we've been working really, really hard to create the department on paper, and then now work through to actually build it and to see it coming into life. Because when I first looked at what we had ahead of us, I have to say it was very daunting, and I had some apprehension about our ability to actually pull this off, to put it all in a a workable, functional state, and that's now happening. We're now seeing the organization come to life, so it's very rewarding. But what it will do is it will turn the process around for applying for work permits, basically. To go back to the original spirit and intent of the immigration law, which says Caymanians must have priority. Ready, willing, and able Caymanians must have first opportunity for the available jobs in Cayman. And so that is what work will do. It will force that starting point, and then failing that, where there are no ready, willing, and able Caymanians for employment, we go to the work permit system. But there's an added dimension to assist Caymanians in being ready, willing, and able for the jobs, is to create training opportunities for them, some upskilling assistance, career counseling. We have a whole range of services we will provide to Caymanians to make sure that they are available to fill the available posts. And then the starting point of all of that is to have data. We will gather data to determine where the job gaps lie, both now and in the future, so that we can work with the education systems and training facilities to ensure that they meet those gaps in the labor market.
Now, Ms. Sharon, as you referenced, it is not a merger. We've seen in the media, and as well as some of the pundits, indicating that was the perception. Now, by it not being a merger, the NWDA will still continue to function on the summit, or is that?
Nope. There will be no more NWDA. And in fact, there will be no more immigration at all in Cayman, probably by the end of this year, because immigration will be split into two functions. The enforcement arm of immigration is going to merge with customs to become Cayman Border Force. enforcement, and all of those functions, excuse me, under one umbrella. And then work will be the other part. So we have to, from now, stop associating anything that we're doing with NWDA or immigration. Right. We're having to build that culture from now. So it's not just a cultural change for those two organizations. Would be three. Yeah. It's a cultural change for Cayman, because we won't have customs as we know it, we won't have immigration as we know it, and we won't have NWDA.
Right. Now, with that in mind, and as we look at the functions now of granting of work permits and business licenses have been taken up, residences, statuses, and all those things, where, if any, does that play into work? Specifically granting of work permits and the like, and residency.
Well, I mean, we will still have that facility, obviously, but I can't speak too much in detail about that right now, because we are still building the business processes, and they haven't been finalized. We're close. But I think I'm coming back actually in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
I'll be able to give you more detail about that. But so that there's no alarm, that facility obviously will exist. But I can tell you, people will be very pleasantly surprised at how much better the process is going to be.
Yes.
It's not ours.
Absolutely. Certainly I want to echo the sentiments made by Ms. Rolston and how far we've come. Certainly, as we've talked about in the past, in the first interest, the coalition government agreed in its several different manifestos that immigration and Caymanian employment were a priority, if not priority number one. As you know, we are a coalition administration made up of two parties plus the independents. So prior to the SPS being unveiled in August 2017, an effort was made to combine the various manifestos of all of the now elected MLAs and combine them into a single document with a single vision. We came up with 8 strategic objectives as a coalition government, and strategic objective number 2 was to improve the functioning of the labor market, as certainly Ms. Rolston has pointed out, and to ensure that Caymanians find full and permanent employment for Caymanians specifically. So a lot of work has gone in for the last year into what is now or what will be called work, or is called work, and certainly come January 2019 we will see the implementation and rollout of that brand new department, as Ms. Rolston pointed out, which
it's June 2019.
June 2019. The original plan was January. Now it's June 2019 that we will seek to have that rolled out and fully operational. There will be the labor component, which will seek to address all jobs in all sectors. We will seek to implement a jobs clearinghouse, as we've talked about, making it a requirement for all jobs vacancies to be posted on a single portal, which will fall under that umbrella. That will enable the government to better manage and plan the needs of the labor market, both in the immediate short term as well as for the long-term future planning, to include opportunities for Caymanians. We have obviously the first hurdle for us was to establish a director, and I'm quite pleased that Ms. Sharon Rolston was selected in that position. I can certainly think of no better person that is enabled to get us to where we need to be, and certainly I think to get us even further because of her passion for Caymanians and the labor market itself. But we also talk about that it's not a merger. In the past year, we have done a number of organizational reviews. You will recall the organizational review that we were assisted with Deloitte, which was taking a look at both the operations of immigration, the border control aspect, and also the operation of the previous NWDA. I think the NWDA, National Workforce Development Agency, was the government's first approach to dealing with unemployment on a large scale, which until 2007, we didn't have unemployment at the large scale, particularly amongst Caymanians. Some would say our economy was blessed. A lot of things changed in 2007, the financial meltdown. That led to, of course, depreciated jobs and, of course, Caymanians having that sentiment that they were being left behind. We learned a lot of valuable lessons, I think, from the NWDA process, but we also identified a number of gaps and areas in which the job could have been done better. So workforce opportunity and residency Cayman represents a reimagined or revisioned approach to addressing issues connected to the labor market. And again, as Ms. Rolston has pointed out, there is the component of looking at the labor market and the jobs, which includes Caymanians, but also the issuing of work permits, permanent residence and status, because we believe those are central to determining the overall labor market. What jobs are currently with work permit holders that are coming due that could otherwise go to Caymanians? How do we identify what jobs or the gaps that Caymanians are lacking in? There are fundamentally 3, if not 4, major categories in the immigration work permit system that represents over 70% of the overall work permits of this country issues. It is the government's belief that a lot of those jobs are jobs that Caymanians can do, but traditionally have not necessarily either, generated interest in, or perhaps there was an absence of vocational training programs. So the goal of work is to look more, I think, strategically and based on physical evidence as to where are the gaps in the labor market, where are the opportunities for Caymanians to participate, and how do we make that happen in a holistic and efficient manner. And I think, with the work that has gone into the last year, we've accomplished a lot of those, and I think certainly come June 2019, the public will be confident, if not satisfied, that those goals have been achieved. But without a doubt, we have that monkey on our shoulder. Our first attempt, let's call it what it is. It wasn't the best, and that has created a number of feelings, both in terms of the unemployed Caymanians as well as the business sector in terms of the government's ability to solve this issue. We acknowledge that important lessons have been learned, and we've looked at it very closely, and we believe that this second version, which will be work, will be a dramatic improvement on the issues that we all face as an economy and as a community.
Sure.
I would just like to say that June 2019 is 1 year away, and it's not that far. We have a very, very large job ahead of us, and changing the culture is a big part of that. One thing I'd like to say is that with the emphasis now being on Caymanians, and the goal is full Caymanian employment within the meaning of full in economic terms, because there are limitations, but like I said, for ready, willing, and able Caymanians, every Caymanian who is either unemployed currently or underemployed, who is seeking perhaps a promotion, should start to register once we have that facility, which will not be far from now. Because if they're not on the register, we can't match them to the jobs that are posted, and that will be the way going forward. So, there's been a bit of a stigma with Caymanians enlisting on the NWDA registry for whatever reason, justified or not. But that will be the only guaranteed way that a Caymanian will be able to, make employers aware that they're available and have the skills. That system is going to be so good. I wish I could share more detail right now, but that will come in due course. But we're aiming for an entirely paperless environment. So if you can imagine that, if if you've ever been in the immigration offices, you can see that they're just. Files are piled to the ceilings, and it's hard to even cross in the corridors. And so we'll be going from that to a paperless environment. It's very exciting, but it will certainly make the processes more efficient, more transparent, it's just going to be, in the Premier's words, a radical shift in the way we do business.
Now, from that perspective, I speak to MLA and Councillor Mr. Austin Harris and the Director of the Workplace Opportunity and Residency in Cayman, Ms. Sharon Rolston. Laws, labour law in particular, is there a need for laws between now and then to be amended, for new laws to be introduced?
Yes. They're going to be at least two tranches of changes or amendments to labor laws. The first will be amendments to the Immigration Law 2015 that will take place in the upcoming sitting of the Legislative Assembly, which is scheduled for the 27th of June. An idea as to what some of those changes are, largely minor in many respects. As it presently exists, the Chief Immigration Officer, through the traditional immigration platform, has the authority to grant work permits, permanent residency, in some cases, status applications. We are going to seek to transfer those authorities as it relates to migrant applications away from the traditional, as we know it, immigration department, and have those authorities and powers transferred over to work through the interim director, Ms. Sharon Rolston. And of course, what will be established will be boards and bodies that will assume these functions. This role will enable, as Ms. Rolston has pointed out, work to replace what we know as the traditional immigration function. Those immigration functions, aside from labor, will relate to border control, and that will be what will represent the merger between immigration and their border control, their enforcement, together with a customs unit, which will be the Border Control Force, which will, of course, deal with issues of entry into the Cayman Islands. But those are some of the amendments that will be forthcoming. We've had a number of discussions with stakeholders in terms of, what are some of the legal implications of the creation of this new department, and again, a fundamental shift away from the way business has been done usually under the new vision and the new umbrella. So there will be some changes, and again, the first tranche of changes will come about in June, and they will largely represent a transferring of powers to work and to the director in order to fulfill our mandate.
Now, with respect to that, in the ensuing year, in this next 12 months or so as we transition, any concern that either one, a lot of things would get rushed through in order to be able to get accommodated, or things would either stagnate in order to get to this point? So the business will continue, presumably. Our applications now as they've been handled will continue. Any concerns that we may either get A, things being done expediently, or B, being delayed?
Well, anything can happen, but I'm very confident that excuse me, that we will meet our benchmarks. So far, we're on track. As you probably know, Deloitte is our project management office, and under the directorship of Mr. Taron Jackman, who is a difficult taskmaster. He keeps us on track.
Sure does.
Keeps us to our deadline. So, and I say that with respect. We have a very, very solid team, and I think it'll be helpful to understand that, certainly I'm not doing this on my own. We have 7 different work streams, all headed up by very competent and qualified people who are focusing on particular areas. So, for example, the governance is a team currently reviewing the law. Once we get the framework for the law, because the law has to change. The immigration law now covers both the permission side and the enforcement side. So with the organization being split, that law will effectively cease to exist in its current form for certain. So the governance stream is looking at those amendments. From the law, policies will be developed. And we have a communication stream, our business processes stream, systems stream, talent management, which is a huge part of this.
That's the human resource aspect of it.
Yes, impacting human lives. And then we have the facilities and the content management. So going back to this paperless environment, we have to transition, obviously, into that by scanning the current files and getting rid of documents that we can get rid of. But like I said, those work streams are headed up by very capable individuals and their teams, and we all work to deadlines. And so far, thankfully, we're on target. And so I'm very optimistic. I totally accept that there might be hiccups along the way, but we've been able to meet this latest deadline within the Legislative Assembly's timeline for getting the first tranche of legislative changes in. And then by September, which is another aggressive timeline, is when we will have the other tranche, and that will be it basically. So we have a lot of work to do between now and September to make sure that the law is, accords with the system that we will be putting in place.
But I just want to state that nothing has been rushed in this process, but it has been very strategic and very deliberate. As I pointed out, we're now 13 months, if you will, into the new administration. But certainly during the last 12 months, we have been reviewing the business processes of existing departments and mechanisms of government in addressing labor. Whether it be the NWDA or whether it be the traditional immigration route. We have, engaged a consultant, Deloitte, to take a look at organizational structure and an organizational review. We have sat with and interviewed, and I believe we've received honest feedback from members of immigration and NWDA in terms of, what they believe have been some of the successes, what they believe have been some of the gaps. This is the work that has taken the better part of 13 months in order to arrive at where we are. So as we look forward and certainly look to where we presently are with establishing work, we have taken very slow but calculated steps in order to achieve the deadlines that we have set for us. And as Ms. Ralston pointed out, yes, those deadlines are strict, and we've worked very hard to keep those deadlines because we are all working with the end goal that come June 2019, work will be operational. And when that operational date takes effect, what we don't want to have is a situation, as you've just mentioned, that we've rushed to get here, that we have not, taken the time to pay attention to the finer details. The devil's in the details, as they say.
I say God in the details.
Absolutely. And I can tell you with every confidence that your government, and certainly with the help of Interim Director Ms. Ralston, we have painstakingly sought to identify all of the key areas so that there are no gaps, so that there aren't any delays. When we look at the present status quo of business communities, of the business community, they tell you that the present work permit regime is slow and cumbersome. That slow and cumbersome process obviously impacts the way that business functions. But at the same token, we have to appease not only the law, the labor law that says if there is a willing and able Caymanian, that willing and able Caymanian should be given first preference. So when we look at the changes, if you will, to the work permit regime, there are two factors that we keep top of mind. Number one, that if there is a Caymanian available, opportunities are made available to that Caymanian first. But secondly, we also appreciate the needs of businesses and that time is money. And that same business needs to be able to retain the talent they need in order to further their business. So it is very much about a balance. And it is that balance in mind that have largely led the work that has gone on in the last 12 months and will continue on until June, so that when work is operational, when it opens its doors to receive its first customer, we will see an improvement on efficiency, we will see an improvement on transparency, but more importantly, we'll see an improvement in terms of permanent retaining of jobs, specifically for Caymanians, but also a greater planning for the labor market, both in the present time as well as our future labor needs going forward.
No, with this, sorry, Ms. Sharon.
No, I was just going to say, Dwayne, that this is a collaborative approach. We're not sitting up at the top dictating how things should go without understanding the issues. And to Councillor Harris's point, we have staff from immigration and NWDA who have sat on some of the business processes committees to identify the concerns and the issues and the problems, eradicate them, and suggest better ways. And we get into a lot of debates and discussions, but we end up at the end of the day with what we think is a very solid approach that we can present to businesses in due course, which we intend to do within the next week or so. I think we're heading out on the road. So we're at a point where we've understood the issues and the problems. We've designed a system that we believe will vastly improve what currently exists. And then we're going to take those ideas out to the wider public and get that feedback. And, you know, we tweak what we've done. Hopefully we don't have to tweak a lot because we'll have such a good plan that everyone will be, you know, have no criticisms. But we welcome those because, you know, there may be something that we've missed. I'd be interested to see what it is because of the amount of vetting that we do. But it is a collaborative, so please don't think that come June 2019 we're just going to throw open the door and we've done this on our own. It will have been a huge team effort, and that's from within the organizations and the wider public. And also just to say, whilst we will plan to go be open for business on June 2019, actually January 2019 we will go live with certain businesses to test it and to phase out the old and phase in the new.
Soft launch, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, so that will require, you know, we have to have our staff trained up and continuous training until June 2019 when we're able to go.
We do have a caller join us, MLA and Councillor Austin Harris, together with the Director of the Workplace Opportunity Residents of Cayman, Ms. Sharon Rolston, our guests, as we go to our phones. Hey, good afternoon and welcome. You're on Talk Today.
Hello. Good to hear the voice of Austin Harris and Mrs. Rolston, Jane.
Yeah, my friend. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your call.
All right. Man, don't. When I just turned on the radio, because I didn't know who was on, I was going to say a bunch of crocs. I am so disappointed. You know, if I come to this island, I start working, and when you get down to about 7 years, I can live here for life, and I can go home with a lot of money, come back here. I got the best of two worlds. This is a shame. People take this island over diplomatically. Caymanians can do almost anything, boss. I ain't got no big education. I used to work in hotels, serving food. A touch screen TV, a touch screen phone to get your order. For a guest, I can't do that.
Yeah, man. So you're saying the opportunities are there?
Be done, guys.
All right.
It's a long time talking.
All right. Thanks very much, sir. Thanks for sharing that. Now, if I may, well, Mr. Harris, if you wish.
Yeah, no, you know, I first of all, I thank the caller for taking the time to call in, and secondly, I thank him for, I think, representing the sentiment that has existed up to now, and that is that resentment from Caymanians that they're not being given a fair shake. And again, I take nothing away from those callers' remarks. That is just one of the challenges that this administration is seeking to solve. We are not making excuses for what may have been, happening before. We are acknowledging that there have been gaps, there have been failures. There is the issue of discrimination against Caymanians in the local workforce. There is an ignorance, if you will, or an evasion to the immigration laws themselves and the requirements that Caymanians are entitled to that first shot at the apple. But there is also a degree of responsibility on the Caymanians. There is, the caller talked about, there was a time in the hospitality industry when the hospitality industry was all Caymanians. But today we look at it and they aren't there. The question we have to ask ourselves is why. A lot of these folks had these jobs, but then time and circumstances, each individual case is different, but they quit or they resigned or they were fired or whatever the case may be. Where are they now? Times have changed. Technology has changed. Business processes have changed. So it is our responsibility to make sure that children coming out of schools, graduates, have the foundation skills so that they can be trainable to meet the specific needs of jobs. But at the same token, when we look at, and again, I give you the example earlier on, there are 15,000 work permits, or 70% of the overall work permit system, that are in categories that Caymanians can occupy. Service and sales workers, which includes barbers, bartenders, waiters, waitresses, cashiers, cooks, hairdressers, security guards, all going to work permit holders. Caymanians can do these jobs. Elementary occupations, caregivers, kitchen and laundry attendants, beach attendants, general laborers, cleaners, all going to work permit holders. Caymanians can do these jobs. Craft and trade workers, auto mechanics, auto body, electricians, carpenters, painters, masons, plumbers. These are all honorable jobs.
Necessary
These
jobs
are
as well.
necessary jobs, quite right. But we have to ask the question, I'm Caymanian, so I'm going to say to my fellow Caymanians, look, you got to look in the mirror. Are we all looking to be lawyers, doctors, accountants? And as a result of that, we're forgetting the 70% of jobs that make up this market? You know, there was a time our parents would say, I want my son to work in a bank. The reality is a starting plumber or mason or electrician makes a higher earning salary than the first entry-level bank teller. That's a fact. So these are jobs that, for whatever reason, as a culture, we have not necessarily encouraged our children to go into. But these are necessary jobs. These are jobs that training can be provided, vocational or otherwise. These are jobs that we can create apprenticeship and internship programs so that the job seeker can feel out the job holder, the company themselves. They both can understand, what does this job require? But the same token, the employer can say, what is the work ethic of this potential new employee? There are ways in which we can improve the status quo, but to the caller's point, I agree with him.
I do too.
This is an issue that we have to acknowledge is real. We have to stop making excuses for, and we have to start stepping forward with real workable solutions. And that's what we're doing. And
we have to change that culture, as Councillor Harris said, because those are honourable jobs. Anything that you do honestly, I think is and legally is an honourable job. And I wish I could give full credit to, or give the credit to the two immigration officers. I only know their first names, and I don't have my phone with me, but two guys that were doing their job, Courtney and Brian, they were checking out one particular situation, which led them to an investigation that didn't turn out to be, the end of the result. The investigation was fine, but it flagged them to a salary in the food and beverage industry that they thought was exorbitant, that was really high. Like, this person must not have been telling the truth. But come to find out that, some of the staff were earning, a good percentage of the staff were earning over $10,000 a month. And so, I don't think there's any dishonor in that kind of a job. So we have to change the culture. We have to change our thinking. And we have to remember, it is not where you start, it's where you finish. So you can start out as an F&B server and end up as the F&B manager, the hotel manager. The sky's the limit for Caymanians. So we've got to stop being in bondage by believing that we can only take professional tracks. We have to look at the vocational, some of the more basic ones, and start out there. But get everyone with the dignity of a job. Who wants to go to NAU for a handout? I mean, we have to own this situation now, and we have to work together. Work is going to provide the opportunities for that, but as Councillor Harris said, Caymanians also have to step up to the plate and make themselves available.
Indeed. We do have another caller online, Councillor Emily Austin Harris, and Ms. Sharon Rolston are our guests. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome. You're on Talk Today.
Oh, Mr. Dean.
Hey, my friend. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, man, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, guest.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your call.
Kind of right timing still. But you talk about changing the culture. Do you mind answering a question that seems like nobody don't want, pay no mind to?
You can ask the question, man. Who knows? It may be answered.
No, I'm wondering if the guest's willing to answer it.
Oh, well, we'll try.
If they're willing not to just, kind of flip a pancake on me.
Go right ahead. I think I know the question that's coming, but fire away anyway.
Yeah, you must expect it. He's sitting here, right? So, the question is, we talking about changing our mindset, right? Tell me the true, honest answer that the war on drugs is working, right? And the thing is, the laws here are so familiar to to the laws in Georgia State in the USA. Some of the most racist and most strictest laws in the world. Can you tell me why that is? I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And I don't know, Mr. Harris, you may be more familiar with that, sir.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, it's a rather general comment. I think the caller had a question but didn't decide to ask the question he wanted to ask. As far as are our laws stricter than they are anywhere else in the world, I can't say that. I certainly can't say that. I think if they were stricter, some of the challenges that we're seeing wouldn't exist. I mean, you want to compare apples to oranges. You've got the Cayman Islands laws, or you've got Singapore laws. In Singapore, you can't spit on the sidewalk. That's an arrestable offense. Their littering laws are, absolute. That's prison time. So does the Cayman Islands have stricter laws than Singapore? The answer would be no. So without knowing the context in which the caller's question is being asked, I can't really answer either way.
Mr. Harris, if I may ask, though, speaking to such a topic in relation to work, will this new entity and legislation as amended, you say apply to all sectors, will I also include the public service or just the private sector?
As I understand it, is just the private sector, because obviously the private sector and the public sector are operated by two different sets of rules. But certainly, I will allow Ms. Sharon to chime in on this point. All the work that I've been involved in thus far has been specifically related to private sector, to things relevant to work permits, things relevant to the NWDA and the unemployed Caymanians. Yes, there is room for these Caymanians to move into the public sector, but there's the labor law, which addresses largely the private sector, and then there's the public management finance law, which addresses civil servants, and the two are very different. But certainly. But
how employers find the Caymanians, as far as we're developing the system, there'll be one stream. So if government is looking for a Caymanian as well, if the Caymanian isn't registered on that job clearinghouse,
yes,
then they'll never know that they exist out there. So the process for the private sector and the public sector will be the same. Whereas at the end of the process, if you don't find a Caymanian, you go to a work permit. Obviously, there's no work permit requirement within government, so that would change. But for the employer and the Caymanian to find each other, the process will be just one streamlined process.
If I may then, just to better understand it, in that process then, whether it's the public sector or the private sector looking for an employee, private sector specifically, for them now to be granted some sort of whatever the work permit is going to be called, if it's going to be changed at that process, they will have to have demonstrated that they've applied, that they've gone through the system, that master list, and so listen, there's nobody here matching.
Yes,
we've now got a certification of sorts to verify that we've done it, and so this is going to be part and parcel of our support and documentation why this new hire either should be taken on board or we continue with the person we have.
Correct.
Okay.
And one thing that I wanted to say, one of the callers kind of just reminded me of it, is that the one with the strict laws, I don't know about the laws being strict, but I know that there's a lot of unenforcement of our laws. And that will also change under this new organization, because we have an entire devoted compliance section who will not only provide compliance for our internal processes, but will also be proactively ensuring that employers are also complying. So, I think there's been a little bit of abuse of the system because of our lack of abilities and capabilities and frankly, bodies in that area, and that will change as well. So the laws may become or appear to be stricter after work.
Because of enforcement. Now, with respect to application of this new entity, churches, charities, associations, schools, different entities of that nature, NGOs and the like, will the new regime equally apply to them as well as it will to the private sector bank or financial services provider or painting contractor?
There's just going to be one system. It'll be very simple, one process. If you are looking for a Caymanian, that's your starting point. If you're looking to fill a job, and you go through the process of trying to identify a Caymanian, and at the end of that there's no Caymanian available, then you go to the work permit or the government contract. But there are different requirements for every situation, because we haven't gotten to the stage of reviewing finalizing. We are reviewing the fee structures and that type of thing. So some of those that will be treated differently. The system is going to be set up to steer those kinds of applicants in that direction. But in terms of the process, there is just going to be one process, and it will be online. I don't want to cause any alarm to the people who are not tech savvy, but because we will provide assistance to those situations. But it will be all via an online process.
Yes. I just want to, you mentioned specifically churches and charities, and certainly in the last 13 months has been, in many respects, a learning process for myself, and in particular a learning process involving what the specific criteria of the available laws are. But I discovered not too long ago that it's actually Section 3 of the immigration law that exempts churches and charities from that law. I'm not quite sure what the thinking was at the time of the drafting of the law, why churches and charities are somehow exempt from the immigration law and the procedures of it. But perhaps this may form part of those legislative amendments that may come. Certainly it won't be in June, but it may very well come in September, because I take on board the point that Ms. Rolston stated. What has been lacking in the Cayman Islands is standardization. That is one rule for everybody.
Right.
And that rule is supported, if not underlined, by legislation, whether it be the immigration law, whether it be the immigration regulations, whether it be the labor law. How do we create one set of guidelines that are uniform across the labor market? And certainly that has been the objective, and that is what many of the ongoing discussions have been over the last 13 months. So specific to churches and charities, I would suspect, but I do not know definitively, I cannot say definitively, whether amendments to those laws will also include changes to churches and charities. But I will say that individually, I support those changes, because the minute you start making exceptions is when you open the door for complications, because where do you stop? Churches and charities are exempt from this section. Then what's to exempt, certain Fortune 500 companies, for example, who are providing services that are largely, conducted in Cayman, exempt businesses, for example. So the goal has to be, if we're seeking to create standardization across the board, one rule for everybody, which is easy to understand, then let's accomplish that and make one rule, not, different sets of rules for different sets of people. But I just want to clarify that churches and charities under the immigration law, which is Section 3 of the immigration law, are presently exempt from the rules and requirements.
We're going to break?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I was just going to say that we're also simplifying the categories of permissions that you can get, because right now there are any number of permanent residency types of applications you can make. And you can almost just throw a dart at one and find out that one's wrong, so you go to the next one. We're looking at simplifying all of those processes to make it absolutely clear which application you need to make. Same thing with work permits, and work permits are pretty easy, but temporary work permits, there's a range of categories of temporaries as well. So, keep it simple. That's my philosophy. That's what we're doing. It will be a much easier process to navigate ultimately.
Right. Well, when we come back from our break, let's ask some of the questions. We take some other calls. We have a few comments on our WhatsApp that we want to share with our listeners and ask our panelists. So please stay tuned for Talk Today. Hey, good afternoon and welcome back to Talk Today. Thank you for joining us. And in the studio, Councillor and MLA, Mr. Austin Harris, and the Director of the Workplace Opportunities, our residents, Cayman, Ms. Sharon Rolston, joins us. We do have some callers online, a couple of emails, WhatsApps, and I think a message or two via the carrier pigeon. We'll get to each one. Let's go to our phones first, though. Good afternoon and welcome. You're on Talk Today.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon to your panel. Good afternoon. And just a quick question I would like to ask. What's the job of the NBA? Because I'm a registered person there, and for a while now I've been they're searching the website, trying to get a job there. And not one of them picked the phone up, to find out, have you gotten a job, or come in and let's see what we can do for you. They just register you and then that's it. There's nothing else. They don't help you. So what would be the difference with this one prior to the one that is coming on board now?
Sure. Well, in the first instance, the NWDA's first role was to register unemployed Caymanians so that the government will have the beginnings of a database to say how many Caymanians really, through empirical evidence, are actually unemployed. What are the skill sets of those Caymanians? What are the gaps that exist? And then how do we go about making those Caymanians more marketable, more job ready? So the first instance, it was a registration factor to get details from you so that we can have those details entered into a database, which is extremely important because in this country we know more about our work permit holders than we do about our own Caymanians. Because we don't have an income tax base, we do not regularly ask Caymanians to provide information specific to labor. So we know more about those who are on work permits because of the robust and arduous, work permit application system that our foreign nationals we have a complete database on. The second aspect of the NWDA was to provide those, some would call it upskilling and training, to address gaps and to make those persons registered with the NWDA more marketable and employable. Now, unfortunately, that has been an Achilles heel for the NWDA, part in terms of the operation of the NWDA, but part also in terms of a degree of responsibility on the unemployed. A lot of people think that, well, I go to the NWDA, I sign up as unemployed, and that's the end of my responsibility. They'll give me a call when a job shows up, and I'll apply, and then I'll get the job. In many cases, and again, we talked about the 70% of work permits that represent 15,000 persons, 15,000 jobs that Caymanians could occupy, but they require certain skill sets. If you want to be a barber, for example, you got to learn how to cut hair. You want to learn to be a waiter and waitress, you got to learn how to carry a tray. You got to learn customer service. You got to learn how to communicate, both orally and written. A lot of our unemployed Caymanians don't have these skills. So hence we saw the introduction of Ready to Work and Passports of Success. But because these programs are largely voluntary, a lot of the persons registered at the NWDA weren't making themselves available to these course offerings that were being provided. So what you would have is 1,700 Caymanians, give or take, registered on the NWDA, but only 2 or 3 willing to participate in these programs that would otherwise work towards making them more employable. The other issue, of course, was follow-up. How often do you engage with your clients? Well, again, it comes down to human resource capacity. The NWDA is a small organization, and you're looking at probably for every workforce officer, they're looking at 100 to 150 clients. Now, that's a heavy load for one person to manage. Again, things that we identified earlier on that needs to be incorporated in the ways that work will reimagine this approach. So, there are 8 strategic goals coming out of work, but the first will be to develop new work programs that make Caymanians more work ready and successful in the workplace. And that will be doing more than just taking your names and numbers, but identifying what are your skill sets? What jobs have you held in the past? What are you good at? Are you interested in pursuing work in these areas, or what are your interests? You want to go somewhere else. If you want to go somewhere else, that's going to require retooling in many cases. And that means it'll give us the opportunity to tailor-make the vocational programs based on both the needs or desires of the applicant, the Caymanian, but likewise what is available within the workforce. So that we aren't just saying, you want to be, you want to be an aircraft mechanic. Well, if there are no jobs available in the labor market for aircraft mechanics, then you can have the training, but you end up with no job. How can we train you and provide you with skills that make you marketable for jobs that are relevant and available in today's market?
Okay, are you still there, Mom?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Actually, yes, I'm here. I heard all that. But what about those that really have the skill that is registered with there, but never get a call to say, okay, yes, we find something for you. So, you know, things like that. So it's not that people are registered and they don't have a skill.
Yes.
If I could just say, I am not working for the NWDA, and you know, as I said earlier, that organization will cease to exist in due course. So whilst that may be your current situation, the future state of persons in situations such as yours will be able to come to work to the organization, and if you're a person such as yourself that's ready, willing, and able to get a job, we will have a facility that will help link you to an employer. For Caymanians who need some upskilling and training, we're not going to be providing the training because that's what's happening now, and there's too many different functions for too few people, and we're not doing anything right, or not as well as we could be doing it. So we are going to link those Caymanians up with those trainers and those providers who can assist them in meeting their needs. We will just facilitate the process and not actually do the training ourselves. So we will be able to identify and provide assistance to people who have differing needs and be able to help them in whatever state that they are when they come to us. Some will just be able to go on the system and register themselves and hook up with an employer without any assistance from anyone. And that will be ideal. But for the people that need the extra assistance, the training, or assistance in just getting online, then that's what work will provide. So hang in there and keep hopeful. But in the meantime, I think as Councillor Harris said, it's just a case of just not enough people to manage the need that exists. Right. And one other important thing, because another part of the NWDA job responsibility now is to kind of filter persons who are coming from the NAU who have to be seen to be looking for a job at least to be able to get the benefit. And so we have realized that some of those people in many cases are not going to be employable for whatever reason, and no disrespect to them, that's just their reality. That work will not be able to accommodate those situations. That will be dealt with in some other way, but this is going to be strictly for people who genuinely want to work and have get them prepared for it if they're not already.
Councillor Harris, if I could respectfully ask you, I thought I'd inject your thought, but let's pause for news and then we come back. We'll continue the discussion. Please stay tuned. Hey, good afternoon and welcome back to Talk Today. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to the company to both Ms. Sharon Rolston, the Director of the Workplace Opportunities Residence, Cayman, Worky, and MLA Councillor.
I just wanted an opportunity very quickly, because I know you got other callers on the line and I don't want to keep them any longer than necessary. But the last caller before the break alluded to what represents the complexities of the unemployment situation, because it represents two sides. On the one hand, we have those persons who don't have sufficient skills, education, or experience that need to be retooled. Work programs need to be made available to them so that we can make them more marketable to the job market that is available. There's the other side of the coin, persons with the experience, with the academic background, with the sufficient skills, but are being denied access to these jobs. And that is what fuels this whole discrimination against Caymanian sentiment. And again, the Coalition Government National Unity, both through work, but other instruments, have instituted a solution to that. Recently, you may recall the Premier's announcement of the Fair Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, this is to ensure that Caymanians who possess the requisite academic and vocational skills are being, in turn, given the opportunities they are richly deserving of. And again, this is not a brand new theory, because it is the basis under which the labor law and the immigration law has existed from time immemorial. If there is an available, qualified, capable Caymanian of equal footing as a work permit holder, then that Caymanian should be given first preference. The problem is, on the unemployment scene, persons like the last caller are being discriminated against. They're not having someone to fight in their corner. And this is the other side of the unemployment equation that work is going to be tasked with addressing.
Now, as you talk about work, we understand what it's not. Can we ask, is it going to be a statutory authority under the government department?
No, it's a government department.
So just the government department falling under.
Well, currently it's under the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, which will obviously have to change because there will be no more immigration. So I can't tell you what it will be,
Fair enough.
but currently it's under that ministry.
A year's hence. Now, earlier we talked about, amended legislation, perhaps even new legislation, certain changes to our framework, departments merging or being sort of passed away. Will there be redundancies in our employment structure, or will there be employees moving from A to B and join up with C? Any concerns?
That's a very good question because nothing like this has ever been done before, where we take two existing organizations, with three if you add customs in, and what do you do? There is a difference between what customs and the enforcement side of immigration will be doing, because that will be a merger, definitely. What work will be is something brand new. And so there's no transition from one place to the next, because the jobs won't be the same. But we're not anticipating redundancies, because taking the two different organizations and creating new services will require staff to staff them up. Now, there will be changes, obviously, in a lot of the functions, but we've undertaken to provide staff with the necessary training to get them into the positions. First and foremost, the staff will be given opportunities to choose or express interest in the positions that they want. If some want a promotion or some want to move or change, we're going to happily help them make that change or get to a new position that perhaps they don't currently have the skills for. We've undertaken to help to provide them so that they are comfortable in their new roles. But in terms of redundancy, no, there will not be any redundancies. Okay. There will be changes, but not redundancies. Right.
We have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask from different facets that have been sort of sent in electronically. First, in relation to work permit holders currently in the private sector, wanting to change employer A to employer B. Now, will they need to also register? How is that handled under this new regime? We're talking about Caymanian employees having to be registered in order to be facilitated, but existing work permit holders, once the system comes into play, how are they affected and impacted?
So if a work permit holder wants to change a job, is it?
Going from maybe one sector to the next, or one employer within the same sector to another employer.
Well, that employer will have to start from the beginning, and that is to try to find a Caymanian first and foremost.
Okay.
So that would be the starting point.
But certainly to the point, in order for a Caymanian or a work permit holder to go from one job to the next, there must be a vacancy in the next. And that is when we talk about the job clearinghouse. All job vacancies, all of them, have to be listed in a central portal. So the first step will be to register the job vacancy here. Then, of course, you go through the exercise of advertising, seeking interested parties. Then the employer has to satisfy work that of the applicants received. Either no Caymanians met the need, and therefore justify the need for a work permit, or identify suitable Caymanians who did apply and give them the job.
Well, all that will be tracked too. So, there will be no more. It's going to be very difficult to cheat the system.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is a big help to the Caymanians that have been discriminated against, in the past.
Okay, we've come, Mr. Harris.
Just simply to that point. One of the again issues raised by stakeholders in the business community, but also from employees' standpoint, is the lack of transparency in the work permit process. And as Ms. Ralston has quite rightly identified, one of the significant changes in the new way of doing business under the work umbrella will be to improve that transparency. And in some cases, the goal is to make it so transparent that we fundamentally eliminate the need for persons to FOI, because that information is already available. There should be no secrecy when it comes down to, a job has been advertised for, a vacancy has been identified, who applied for it. and who ultimately got the job and why did they get the job, whether they be Caymanian or a work permit holder. We shouldn't be standoffish or scared to say, well, a work permit holder got the job over Caymanian, if we can identify the reasons why that occurred. Mm-hmm. And likewise the same in the opposite. So one of the goals is to improve the transparency of these processes so that we can, again, gain better credibility and gain the confidence of the labor market, individuals out there, and knowing that, okay, so the government is changing their platform, their way of doing business, but how do I know that this is an improvement and not necessarily, a way of making the system more bureaucratic or, more cumbersome? We do that by making the processes transparent to all. Some will succeed and some we won't, but certainly this is an exercise of arriving at that goal, at making this both more efficient and more transparent.
Well, one thing that hasn't existed for Caymanians before is the right of appeal. So whereas in the past, only work permit holders or potential work permit holders could appeal a decision of the board, Caymanians can also now appeal a decision where they feel that they were qualified for a job and were denied. So that's never been the case for Caymanians. So that is one of the benefits. The other thing is that the jobs, all available jobs, have to be on the registered on the database, and it will be accessible. So you're not limited to a newspaper ad once every 7 days, and you might miss it. You can go on that site at any given time and see what jobs are available and what jobs are coming available as well. So to help you plan, if it's something that you want a career move or change, you see it up ahead and you can prepare yourself for it.
And this would indicate, the employer and all the requisite details that one would know, because sometimes ads know on behalf of my client, financial services provider looking for a certain kind of thing. You don't know, it could be your job being advertised, right?
Right.
All right.
True.
We do have some callers online. With great respect, let's go and join our callers. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for sharing.
Good afternoon, folks. How you doing?
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon, sir. Thanks for your call.
Good afternoon, Austin and Sharon and Sterling. Having been on both sides of the fence, self-employed for over 17 years before then, or being employed for 10 years, then 17 years, and now again, back out on my own. I'm kind of conflicted with some of the. I totally understand some of the headings that the current business owners have to go through in terms of labor resources. One of the concerns that I have is that we're putting together this new system, and it'll all sound really nice and good, but then there's no legislation behind it with teeth. Teeth, I want to stress.
Mm-hmm.
So that then all of a sudden now people throw their hands up there going, well, yeah, we've spoken to this employer or that employee or what have you, but there's nothing we can do because there's no legislation to facilitate the issue or to deal with the issue at hand. And then we still keep going around in circles. And primarily one of the things is that right now, even though and enforcement being one of the big issues, even though right now immigration has the authority, as I understand it, to go into somebody's workplace and to verify claims of whatever nature, they actually don't. And the argument is, or the response has always been, well, we don't have enough people to deal with that. Will these issues continue on? And finally, the other issue is that government is notorious for asking a lot of questions but keeping no notes. So therefore, documentation, record keeping, and such is wanting at best. Will there be notations on files of employers in situations where I've personally witnessed where employees create a situation where some will term it as constructive dismissal, but by the employers, or the employees create a work environment that it becomes unbearable to actually stay within that work environment. In fact, I am actually somebody who ended up, resigning from my post many moons ago for that same reason, and just because it was physically, mentally, draining, and the only way to do that, there was no recourse other than to find something somewhere else. Now, if that's a one-time deal, that's one thing. But, or will we be keeping records to see if this is a pattern within certain organizations so that it can be properly addressed? Because then that's the easiest way for the employer to go, see, I can't get any locals, so I have to hire foreigners. I hope I was clear with that.
Sure.
Constructive dismissal, yeah.
Well, Eddie, I think Councillor Harris will address the Fair Employment Commission. But to your point of the enforcement arm, currently the way immigration is set up is that they have enforcement that's enforcement for border issues and immigration period, as well as trying to monitor what employers are doing. Under the new regime, we will have a dedicated compliance and enforcement section on our own that only acts for work, and so they will be able to be far more proactive in identifying the bad employers that are out there, and hopefully they're just few in number. But it's going to be more difficult to hide under this new system because we will have the manpower and the ability to go after the people who are not trying to comply with the spirit and intent of the law, and it'll be a better situation for all. But I'll let Councillor Harris speak to your other point.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Ralston, and thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your question. First and foremost, in the last 13 months, to our earlier point, a lot of engagement with stakeholders has taken place. We have engaged with the Chamber of Commerce, for example. And before people get freaked out, the Chamber of Commerce, as I understand, statistically, 70% of the members of the Chamber of Commerce are small business owners. So they're self-employed, like Mr. Thompson. They run small shops that, in some cases, do anywhere from small to very large business. We have acknowledge, though, that one of the gaps that exist is that we've lost credibility with a lot of these employers. They think the business process of hiring can be too bureaucratic. In particular, the work permit regime itself, too cumbersome, asks too many questions, and there are too many delays. But as Ms. Ralston pointed out, there's also the need for compliance and enforcement. So we acknowledge in the last 13 months all of the areas that we've fallen down in addressing the issue of employment challenges. And we believe that we have created systems that address those, particularly at the board level. The board level, and we've heard it before, we talk about boards operating in silos. The information is being shared by one board but not being shared by others. Information that may relate to the notes on specific employment infractions or otherwise that I believe the caller is speaking to. So the new envisioned system will take those into account and it will be achieved through the transparency model. There will also be the inclusion, we talked about the Fair Employment Opportunity Commission, which again will seek to address persons who possess the skills but aren't being given the opportunity. They haven't had a voice fighting for them. We believe the commission will be able to do that. In terms of legislative changes coming down the pipeline, again in September, we have to recognize and reward businesses who hire and develop Caymanians. We've talked about in previous administration the immigration accreditation system, because what we're trying to do here is, yes, we are creating a new way of doing business, a new system. And in order for that new system to work, we have to get buy-in from the persons who actually are providing the jobs, which are the private sector, both whether it be small, medium, or large businesses. So we have to say to them, listen, for those companies who are compliant with immigration law, for those companies who employ 15 or more staff, they're compliant with the business staffing plan, which basically is a way of, a business saying, what are your labor needs for the next 2, 5, 10 years, and how do we ensure that you have access to the human capacity you're going to need to meet those goals. There are requirements for training Caymanians. What are your training programs in place so that we can ensure that Caymanians are given the first opportunity? But again, let's face it, this will not erase the need for work permit holders. There will still be the need for work permit holders. What we need to improve is how efficient we are at approving those work permits, but also how transparent we are. Mm-hmm. And those companies who are able to bring that balance between hiring Caymanians and hiring work permits, they should be given incentives for creating that balance. And hopefully in that process, then we will be able to change a culture.
There will be. We're working on an accreditation system as well to reward those employers who are totally compliant with the law. And as Councillor Harris said, obviously, yes, we will always be dependent on work permits to some degree or another. Our goal is just to ensure that whilst we recognise that, we also recognise the other part of the equation where there are Caymanians who are qualified for some of these roles and give them the first shot at them.
All right. Yes. When we come back, we can probably take a call or two, maybe share some other thoughts. We ask you to stay tuned for Talk Today.
There are more questions than answers.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue our discussion in a minutes now with Councillor MLA Austin Harrison and Ms. Sharon Roston, the Director of the Work. We do have one final call, opportunity to take one final call. Good afternoon. You're on Talk Today.
Yeah, Mr. Dean.
My friend, how are you again, man?
I call you back, man.
Oh, well, go right ahead, man.
No problem, man. You don't worry, man.
All right.
That's why I want to ask is, one thing I just want to ask then, right?
Yes, sir.
Why, when I get my check, the bank got to take $5 a day?
or 10, depending.
Solve that for me, please.
All right.
Since you don't want to solve that, I don't want to solve that one, please.
Okay.
Again, the government agrees with the caller in that regard, and I suspect that there will also be some changes that can be expected in the short term. There is that delicate balance, though. I mean, we don't run a dictatorship or an authoritarian style of government. That's not our principle. We operate on a democracy. In many cases, we allow the capital markets to police themselves in many respects, and we assume that it will be on a fair and equitable level for all consumers. But certainly these new fees for check cashing, if you're not a member of the bank, my personal opinion is they're ridiculous. And I think those views are shared by certainly members of this government. We've had more than our share of discussions on that point. And I can tell you, without going into detail, because it is unfortunately an area outside of my area of responsibility, there are some changes that are coming down the pipeline, and to just encourage the listener to watch out for them. But I will say to him that we feel the same pain that you feel, because not only as representatives we hear them from constituents, but in some cases we feel them ourselves.
There are a couple of questions that came through earlier, and even though it's late, let's see if we can ask them. Specifically to the politician, MLA Councillor, Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Says, has the hiring of the Deloitte consultancy been in accordance with their procurement laws? When?
Yes.
Presumably?
It was a
okay.
tender situation.
Right. Yes. It was tendered. A number of companies applied, and Deloitte won it.
All right. So does government intend to honour the 14-day, presumably the 14-day notice period for the new labour/immigration laws that are going to be an amendments that are being planned for June LA sitting?
Actually, it's a 21-day notice period.
Okay.
And everything, every amendment, every piece of legislation that is going to be brought for the June 27 sitting will comply with the 21-day public consultation notice period.
Okay. And then if they intend to bring some of the labour relations bill provisions, for example, the retirement age being increased to 65, or is there an intent to bring some of those provisions in place?
I'm not certain that there are any discussions or plan changes as it relates to retirement age in the June sitting. It may be part of the legislative's calendar a bit further on, September or otherwise, but I can tell you from my understanding, those won't come in on the 27th of June.
Okay. Now, we heard a caller speak to the issue of constructive dismissal, something that has been raised in the past. There are those who will share that you can't force someone to hire someone. So if the employer, for whatever reason, is unwilling or just very reticent to hire some Caymanian who has the qualifications, is there anything in our enforcement, in legislation, or in our culture that would be able to address such an issue if an employer is just trying to find every reason to hire person A over Caymanian person B?
Well, first of all, if I can just answer it based on previous life experience. I sat for a number of years on the labor tribunals, and then for a number of years after that as chairman of at least one of the labor tribunals. Constructive dismissal, and any lawyer will tell you this, is extremely difficult to prove. Because how do you prove intent? How do you prove that I intentionally sought to get rid of Sterling Duane from this job by making his life unbearable and miserable? It is very difficult, but it is provable. Again, it's a challenge for labor tribunals. It's a challenge for, I think, those in the legal profession. Again, it falls back to, what does the law state? We are obligated to provide fair and equitable working conditions. We are obligated to provide to employers access to vacation leave, access to sick leave. We are required to provide to employees adequate training and opportunities for advancement. We have the business staffing regulations, who have, again, their own list of requirements. It's a question of, what does the law allow for, and how much of those laws are being enforced. But again, if somebody can tell me how they prove intent, then maybe that might be able to, solve the challenge. But constructive dismissal is an extremely challenging aspect. And yes, I will acknowledge that it has been used in the past, and I think in many cases it continues to be used today. But it's extremely difficult to prove on an evidence basis. But I would turn my, seek the support of an attorney in studios rather than my basic understanding of the law and legal practice.
Yeah. Well, what I would just say, like to just make clear, is that would be a function of the Labour Department, which will continue to exist. So that will not be a part of the work organization. So that function will still be there. But from a work perspective, and to your point that an employer can't be forced to hire someone that, or a Caymanian, period. Through our system, they will have to make a very, very, very good case as to why they haven't hired a Caymanian who is qualified for the position. That's the starting point. If a work permit is issued, the Caymanian will have a right of appeal. And again, the Fair Employment Rights Commission. Am I saying that name?
You are absolutely correct.
Will also be another avenue that currently doesn't exist. So, for Caymanians who have struggled in the scenario that was the caller described, unfortunately, those situations do exist. But I'm happy to say that they will be minimized under the work regime, and I think with a stronger enforcement and compliance arm, I think that any employers who have been seeking to take a shortcut or to not comply with the spirit and intent of the law will soon recognize that we are providing a much better service to them, and that we are making Caymanians who might not even, like I said, if you don't read the newspaper on those days that jobs are advertised, that's not an unfair, that's not the employer's fault. They've complied with the law and done what they've expected. The process will just make it easier for employers to find Caymanians, and if there are no Caymanians, the system will certainly make it easier for them to obtain a work permit so that their business can continue and Cayman can remain globally competitive.
Indeed. And final thoughts, Mr. Harris. And certainly, as we go through this process, and certainly when June next year rolls around thereafter, if I'm sitting here or whoever else there is, I'm sure the podium is open in order to continue to educate the public.
Yes, no, absolutely. First of all, Sterling, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today, to chat with yourself and your listening audience and those tuning in. I want to thank the dedication of Miss Sharon Ralston and her so far small staff, but that is increasing. We are listing job opportunities to trying to fill at least 3 new deputy positions, which are essential to assisting the interim director, Ms. Ralston, in accomplishing the goals and remit set to her. Again, I want to acknowledge from the onset that we will, in the first instance, seek to to fill these positions internally. And then if we are unable to fill them internally through the existing government family, if you will, then we will, post these jobs in the private sector and encourage participation. I would encourage human resource professionals who are otherwise stakeholders in the remit and the goals of work to reach out to Ms. Sharon Ralston and to be a part of the ongoing work that will lead us to the June 2019 implementation of work here in the Cayman Islands. The primary goal of work will be to manage the labor needs of the Cayman Islands, that we believe the government will create a better balance between Caymanian workers and foreign workers. We believe we will be able to create a system that will be both fair to employers and employees alike, one that will be transparent, one that will be efficient, and one that will enable business to operate more smoothly and build greater human capacity both for the present as well as future needs. We believe it will be a transparent and accountable system to the labor needs of Caymanians. And we also believe it will more successfully work towards developing additional workforce development programs such as internships, apprenticeships, that will lead to permanent and tangible employment for Caymanians in the first instance, but certainly in filling the labor needs in the broader interests going forward.
All right. Thank you both very much. Looking forward to continued opportunity to be able to inform our public. Invite you to enjoy the rest of this wonderful afternoon. To our listeners, have a blessed, safe, productive day. Until then, be blessed.